Opening shot. Berlin, present day versus 1945. This is Berlin today. Thriving capital, bustling streets, modern skyscrapers. Now look at this. Berlin, May 1945. Same city. You wouldn't recognize it. Mountains of rubble, smoke rising from ruins, a dead city. May the 2nd, 1945, 6:00 a.m. General Helmuth Weidling signs the capitulation order. The Battle of Berlin is over. Nazi Germany has fallen. History tells you Germany was defeated and rebuilt, but it doesn't tell you the cost. This is what happened after the shooting stopped. The story of 7 million Germans in captivity. The largest forced migration in history. 12 to 14 million people expelled from their homes. A country erased from the map and reborn as two rival nations. This is the aftermath, and it was more brutal than the battle itself. Chapter 1. The Price of Defeat, Germany in Ruins, opening the moment everything ended, May the 2nd, 1945, 6:00 a.m. In a destroyed command post beneath the ruins of Berlin, General Helmuth Weidling sat across from Soviet commanders and signed a single piece of paper. His hand trembled, not from fear but from exhaustion. The order was simple. The Berlin garrison would lay down its weapons. Outside, in the streets above, German soldiers began emerging from cellars and bunkers. Some threw their rifles into the rubble. Others simply sat down and waited. The Battle of Berlin was over. But for 7 million Germans now in Soviet and Allied captivity, and for millions more trapped in the smoking ruins of their cities, the nightmare was just beginning. The morning after, picture Berlin on May 3rd. A woman named Frau Schmidt, like thousands of other Berliners, walks carefully through streets she no longer recognizes, searching for water. The pipes are destroyed. The only source is a public street station 3 blocks away. She carries 2 buckets, moving between craters and collapsed buildings. Suddenly, a whistle. She drops flat. An unexploded shell, or maybe Soviet artillery still firing at holdouts. She doesn't know. Many Berliners died exactly like this, killed by American bombs or artillery explosions, while simply trying to get water to survive. This was life now. The city that once housed millions had become a death trap, where basic survival was an act of courage. Numbers that break your mind. The final Battle of Berlin consumed approximately 400,000 German casualties, soldiers and civilians combined. Among them, 125,000 were ordinary people who had nothing to do with the war. Soviet losses reached up to 350,000 killed and wounded. Think about that. More people died taking one city than in many entire campaigns, but the battle itself was just the opening act. By war's end, roughly 7 million Germans found themselves imprisoned in Soviet and Allied camps. Cramped conditions, little food, disease. Many would never see home again. A country erased from the map. On April 20th, Hitler's birthday, the dictator received 2 gifts: Soviet artillery shells raining on Berlin and a massive American bombing raid. It was a preview of what was coming for all of Germany. The country's industrial heartlands were gone. All of them. The supply chains that fed German factories, captured, destroyed, or in enemy hands. By May, there was literally nothing left to make weapons with, even if Germany wanted to keep fighting. Germany's infrastructure had been bombed back to the Stone Age. No electricity in most cities, no running water, no functioning rail system. Entire city blocks reduced to mountains of bricks and twisted metal. The economy? It didn't exist. People bartered cigarettes and bread. Currency was worthless. A nation of 70 million had effectively ceased to function as a modern state. Closing, what comes next? As General Weidling's order spread through Berlin, thousands of German soldiers faced a choice: Some tried to flee west, hoping to surrender to Americans rather than Soviets. Others changed into civilian clothes and attempted to disappear into the ruins. But for the millions of ethnic Germans living in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and other Eastern European territories, there would be no choice at all. Their fate was already being decided in conference rooms far away, and it would prove even more brutal than the battle itself. Chapter 2. Expulsion, the largest forced migration in history. The map that changed everything. Imagine you're a German farmer named Klaus Weber, living in a village near Breslau, a city that has been German for 700 years. It's June 1945. The war ended a month ago. You survived. Then Polish soldiers arrive at your door. You have 2 hours. Take what you can carry. You're leaving. Leaving? This is my home. My grandfather built this house. Not anymore. This is Poland now. Get out. Klaus wasn't alone. What happened next was the largest forced population transfer in human history, and it was completely legal. The Potsdam Agreement legalized deportation. At the Potsdam Conference in July-August 1945, the Allied powers, the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, made it official. The international community legalized the deportation of ethnic Germans from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, and the Soviet Union's newly acquired Kaliningrad region. Look at the map. On the left, where Germans lived in Eastern Europe for centuries, towns with German names, German churches, German schools. On the right, the same map after 1945, completely empty of Germans. Between 12 and 14 million ethnic Germans were forcibly expelled from their homes. Entire populations uprooted. The goal was simple: redraw the ethnic map of Europe so that Germans only lived in Germany. The journey west, a road of death. The deportations were supposed to be orderly and humane. That's what the Potsdam Agreement said. Reality was different. Picture a column of refugees stretching for miles. Old people, children, women carrying babies. They walk west, carrying whatever they could pack in 2 hours. No vehicles, no trains for most. Just walking. In Czechoslovakia, Germans were rounded up and marched to the border. Some were beaten. Others had their property confiscated. Not just homes, but wedding rings, watches, anything valuable. In many towns, Germans were forced to wear white armbands marked with N for Nämlich, German, a bitter echo of how Jews had been marked just years before. In Poland, the process was even more chaotic. Polish civilians, Soviet soldiers, and newly formed Polish militias took revenge for years of Nazi occupation. Germans were subjected to violence, robberies, and killings. Sometimes entire communities, guilty only of being German, paid the price for crimes committed by the Third Reich. The expelled Germans often repeated the worst practices of the Nazi regime themselves, but now they were the victims. The death toll. How many died during these expulsions? For decades, the numbers were disputed. German sources claimed millions. Communist governments in Eastern Europe claimed the deportations were largely peaceful. Modern historical research puts the death toll at approximately 600,000 people. 600,000. Let that sink in. That's more than the combined casualties, German and Soviet, from the entire Battle of Berlin and the Berlin Strategic Offensive Operation. They died from exposure, starvation, disease, and violence. Some drowned trying to cross rivers. Others froze in winter transports. Many simply collapsed on the road and never got up. Closing. A silent catastrophe. By 1950, the expulsions were essentially complete. The ethnic German populations of Eastern Europe, communities that had existed for centuries, were gone. The towns they left behind were repopulated with Poles, Czechs, and Soviets. German street names were changed. German cemeteries were destroyed or abandoned. It was as if millions of people had never existed. This was the price Germany paid for the Third Reich's crimes. But it was ordinary people, not Nazi leaders, who paid it. The generals and party officials? Many had already fled west or taken their own lives. The refugees who survived the journey west arrived in a Germany that no longer existed as they remembered it. The country was divided, destroyed, and occupied, and their nightmare was far from over. Chapter 3: Camps, Filtration, and the Hunt for the Guilty from Liberators to Captors. Picture this. You're a 19-year-old German soldier named Hans Müller. On May 8, 1945, you heard the announcement, Germany has surrendered. You throw down your rifle, relieved the war is finally over. You survived. You're going home. Except you're not going home. Not for years. Maybe never. Soviet soldiers round you up with thousands of others. You're marched east, away from Germany. Someone says you're going to a filtration camp. You don't know what that means yet. Hans was one of approximately 7 million Germans who found themselves in Soviet and Allied captivity by the end of the war. For many, the harsh conditions in these camps meant they would never return home. The prisoner system, military and civilian. The camps came in different types, but the experience was universally brutal. Military POW camps. German soldiers captured by the Soviets faced the worst conditions: forced labor in mines, forests, and reconstruction projects. Minimal food rations, often just watery soup and a piece of bread. No medical care. Diseases like dysentery and typhus spread rapidly. The Soviets needed labor to rebuild their devastated country. Why waste resources on German prisoners when you could work them until they dropped? Civilian internment camps. But it wasn't just soldiers. Tens of thousands of German civilians, men, women, and even teenagers, were detained in camps across Eastern Europe. The reasoning? Filtration. Everyone needed to be screened. Were you a Nazi party member? SS? Did you participate in war crimes? Even if you were just a factory worker or farmer, you could be detained for months while authorities decided your fate. The search for war criminals. Here's where it got complicated. Germany had committed unprecedented atrocities during the war: the Holocaust, mass executions, concentration camps. Someone had to pay for these crimes. Allied authorities began hunting for perpetrators. The big names, Göring, Himmler, and others, had already fled Berlin during the final days. Göring surrendered to Americans. Himmler tried to negotiate with the Allies, failed, and committed suicide. But what about the thousands of SS officers, concentration camp guards, Gestapo agents, and Nazi administrators who tried to disappear into the chaos? The desperate escape west. During the final days of the Battle of Berlin, thousands of Germans attempted to break through Soviet lines and flee west. Their plan: reach the Elbe River and surrender to American forces, hoping for more humane treatment. Most didn't make it. Only a few hundred succeeded in escaping the completely encircled city. The rest were killed in the attempt or captured. Hiding in plain sight. Others tried a different tactic: blend into the civilian population, change into civilian clothes, burn your papers, pretend you were just a regular citizen. But this rarely worked. By 1945, almost all men remaining in Berlin had participated in the city's defense in some way. The Soviets knew this. They checked hands for signs of rifle use. They questioned neighbors. They cross-referenced names against captured Nazi documents. Soon, Those who tried to hide were discovered and taken into custody. The trials begin. The most prominent Nazis faced public trials, Nuremberg being the most famous, but thousands of smaller trials happened across occupied Germany. Former SS members, camp guards, local Nazi officials who had enforced brutal policies, even some regular soldiers accused of specific atrocities. The process was often messy. Some guilty men escaped. Some innocent men were wrongly accused. Evidence was incomplete. Witnesses were traumatized or dead. But the message was clear. Germany would face its crimes. The long wait. For millions of POWs who weren't accused of specific crimes, life became an endless waiting game. Years in camps. Letters from home, if they came at all, describing a Germany that no longer existed. Some prisoners weren't released until the 1950s, nearly a decade after the war ended. By then, their families had given them up for dead. Their homes had been reassigned. Their children didn't recognize them. Closing. Two types of justice. By the late 1940s, two parallel realities existed. The top Nazi leaders faced trials, executions, or imprisonment. Justice, however imperfect, was served. Millions of ordinary Germans, soldiers and civilians, languished in camps, victims of collective punishment for a regime they may not have supported. The question haunted post-war Germany. How do you punish a nation for its crimes without destroying everyone in it? The camps, the trials, the filtration process. These were attempts to answer that question. But the human cost was staggering, and for the Germans who finally did return home, they returned to a country that had been completely divided and rebuilt in their absence. Chapter 4. The Birth of Two Germanys, May 1945, a country that no longer exists. It's late May 1945. You're standing at what used to be Potsdamer Platz in Berlin, once the busiest intersection in Europe. Now, rubble, burned-out buildings, a Soviet tank parked where a cafe used to be. A German woman approaches a Soviet soldier. "Excuse me, where is Germany now?" He laughs. "Germany? There is no Germany anymore." He wasn't entirely wrong. The division, 4 pieces of a broken country. Even before the Battle of Berlin ended, the Allies had decided Germany's fate. At conferences in Yalta and Potsdam, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin carved up the map. Germany was split into 4 occupation zones. Soviet Zone, East, controlled by the USSR American Zone, Southwest, controlled by the United States British Zone, Northwest, controlled by Britain French Zone, West, controlled by France Berlin itself, deep inside the Soviet Zone, was also divided into 4 sectors. Imagine living in a city where crossing to buy bread means entering a different country. But this was supposed to be temporary. The plan? Denazify Germany. Rebuild it. Then reunify it. That's not what happened. Denazification, cleaning house, or witch hunt. The Allies had a problem. Practically everyone in Germany had some connection to the Nazi regime. Party members, civil servants, teachers, factory workers, even janitors who cleaned Nazi offices. The Americans created questionnaires, Fragebogen, with 131 questions. Were you a Nazi party member? Did you attend rallies? Did you donate to Nazi causes? Thousands were arrested, some guilty of real crimes, others guilty only of trying to survive under a dictatorship. The problem? Germany needed to function. You can't run a country without civil servants, engineers, and administrators. Many former Nazis, especially low-level ones, were quietly rehabilitated because they were needed. The uncomfortable truth: denazification was both too harsh and not harsh enough. War criminals sometimes escaped. Regular people sometimes faced ruin for minor associations. Two countries emerged from the ruins. By 1949, the Cold War had begun. The temporary division became permanent. West Germany, Federal Republic of Germany. The American, British, and French zones merged. A new democratic constitution was written. The Deutschmark was introduced. Marshall Plan money poured in. Billions of dollars to rebuild. West Germany embraced capitalism and aligned with NATO. Cities like Hamburg, Frankfurt, and Munich began their journey from rubble to economic powerhouses. East Germany, German Democratic Republic. The Soviet zone became a communist state. Soviet-style centralized planning. State-controlled industry. Alignment with the Warsaw Pact. The Soviets stripped East Germany of remaining industrial equipment. Reparations for the devastation Germany had caused the USSR. Entire factories were disassembled and shipped east. The economic miracle versus the workers' paradise. West Germany's Wirtschaftswunder, economic miracle. By the mid-1950s, West Germany was booming. New buildings rose from the ruins. Factories hummed. Unemployment dropped. Germans were buying cars and appliances. The destroyed economy and infrastructure that had thrown the country back to the Stone Age was being rebuilt at breathtaking speed. How? Marshall Plan aid, smart economic policies, a desperate population willing to work 60-hour weeks to rebuild. And perhaps most importantly, integration with the European economy. East Germany's struggle. East Germany rebuilt too, but slower, grimmer. Soviet-style apartment blocks replaced historic city centers. Consumer goods were scarce. Political freedom was non-existent. The contrast became obvious. West Germans vacationed in Italy. East Germans needed permission to leave their own country. The human cost of division. Remember Klaus Weber, the farmer forced from his home in Silesia? He ended up in West Germany, in a refugee camp with thousands of other expelled Germans. Eventually, he got a small apartment in a rebuilt city. He found work in a factory. But he never forgot his village, now in Poland, with a Polish name, inhabited by Polish families. Remember Hans Müller, the POW? He was finally released from Soviet captivity in 1952, 7 years after the war ended. He returned to find his hometown in East Germany under communist control. His mother had died. His fiancée had married someone else. He didn't recognize the country anymore. These were the human faces of Germany's rebirth, millions of individual tragedies that statistics can't capture. Closing. From ruins to rival states. By 1950, the map of Europe had been completely redrawn. Germany, the nation that had nearly conquered the continent, no longer existed as a single country. In its place, two rival German states, separated by barbed wire and ideology. One looking west toward democracy and capitalism. One looking east toward communism and Soviet control. The Battle of Berlin had ended on May 2, 1945. But the battle over Germany's future was just beginning. It would last another 40 years, until a wall fell, and Germans could finally ask themselves, could they become one country again? But that's a story for another time. The immediate aftermath of Germany's defeat, the expulsions, the camps, the division, showed that winning a war and winning a peace are two very different things. Germany paid for the Third Reich's crimes with territory, lives, and unity itself. The question that haunted everyone: was it justice? Was it revenge? Or was it just the brutal mathematics of a world that had suffered too much to forgive? Closing. The price and the paradox. The Battle of Berlin, 400,000 German casualties, 350,000 Soviet casualties, but the aftermath? 600,000 dead in the expulsions, 7 million in camps, 14 million expelled. A nation divided for 45 years. Germany paid for the Third Reich's crimes with territory, lives, and unity itself. Yet here's the paradox. The country bombed back to the Stone Age in 1945 became an economic powerhouse within a decade. The division that seemed permanent ended in 1989 when the Berlin Wall fell. Today, Berlin is whole. Germany is unified and prosperous. The lesson? The cost of war echoes for generations. But even the most broken nations can rebuild, not unchanged, not without scars, but rebuild nonetheless. History doesn't end with defeat. It transforms. Final shot. Modern Berlin at sunset, whole and alive. The Battle of Berlin, April 16th, May 2nd, 1945. Aftermath, 1945-90. Reunification, October 3rd, 1990.